Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back to the hottest show in the world of enterprise IT, Hot Technologies of 2016. Yes, indeed, my name is Eric Cavanaugh. I will be your host today for a show entitled The Art of Visibility, Enabling Multi-Platform Management. Yes, indeed. So a few quick notes. There's a slide about yours truly, admittedly from 5 years ago. And enough about me. Hit me up on Twitter at Eric_Cavanaugh. So the year's hot. This is our standard slide for Hot Technologies. What we did with the show is we wanted a program that would help us to define a particular kind of technology. So the whole idea is that we get two analysts who come in and give their take on a particular space or a particular type of function that the enterprise needs. And then the vendor comes in and demonstrates what they've built and explains how it aligns to what you hear from the analysts. And the reason for it, as you might imagine, is because in the world of enterprise software marketing, there are terms that get bandied about, and what happens invariably is that vendors grab on to the latest hot term, things like big data or analytics, for example, or even SOA, or different terms like platform. And sometimes those words are very accurate for a particular technology, and sometimes they're not. So this show was designed to really help us articulate for you, the audience, what specific kinds of technologies do, how they work, and when you should apply them. So with that, I'm going to introduce our speakers. We've got our very own Dr. Robin Bloor calling in from his Austin, Texas location, Dez Blanchfield calling from the other side of the planet, and our guest, Scott Walz, calling in from Kentucky. And yours truly, I'm actually outside of Pittsburgh, so we've got a fully geolocated organization today from multiple different places. With that, I'm going to push Robin's first slide. Feel free to ask questions, by the way, folks. Don't be shy. You can do so using the Q&A component of your webcast console. And with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Bloor. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, Eric. Let me just get to the first slide. This is a collection of meerkats thinking about database. The whole of the presentation, really, that I'm doing here is really just a general set of thoughts about database that I've had recently. The point being that really around the year 2000, it seemed like the database game was over in the sense that the vast majority of database implementations were occurring on relational database. And then it just changed. You know, and all of these things that the meerkats are thinking about, column stores, key value stores, document database, in-memory database, graph database, and a whole lot more things suddenly emerged. And it was almost like, you know, it's almost like a new kind of geological era that has fossils of different kinds of animals suddenly appeared. So the news from Lake Wobegon, it's really over for the single model database. Well, there's no doubt that RDBMS still dominate, but other kinds of databases are now established. And really that's pretty much the overview of what I'm going to say here. The dimensions of database, some of these actually became more important recently. But the ones that I could think of when I did this slide anyway, does it scale up in terms of using efficiently using the resources of any given server? Does it scale out so it can go across large clusters? Does it exploit the hardware available? That's kind of in-memory databases are going in that direction. Is it distributable? There are a number of databases major on their ability to distribute. What kind of characteristics it's got, the fundamental ACID characteristics of a database, but now instead of having actual consistency, a number of databases have eventual consistency. People use them and they don't have a problem with them, so they've demonstrated that, you know, ACID wasn't absolutely necessary, just a good thing to have in a lot of situations. In terms of metadata organization, the whole game has changed. We've got different metadata organizations rather than the typical RDBMS schema. In terms of the optimizer, there's an awful lot of different optimizer activity going on depending upon the data structures that you're trying to optimize. In terms of manageability, there's a lot of variance in this that I'll come on to later, but basically the whole point of a DBMS is that it is manageable, and again the extent of its manageability to some degree determines the extent of its usefulness. In terms of hardware factors, this is the point really that's saying. I mean, there's only one point that's being made here. The point that's being made here is that whatever we're looking at today in terms of database architectures is going to change. It may be the same databases, but they're going to have to, in one way or another, take account of what's actually going on at the hardware level. For many, many years, we had this relatively simple situation of CPU memory and spinning disk. Well, that's gone, really. So the points here, first of all, we've got CPUs, but they're way more parallel capability than they had before, with many, many different processing cores. We've also got GPUs. We've also got FPGAs, different kinds of silicon, but Intel has married one FPGA with the CPU in its next release. And AMD has married GPU and CPU together on the same chip. So you've got chips with different characteristics. The advantage of a GPU is it's really great for heavy parallelism, particularly with numeric calculation. FPGAs, you can, in one way or another, you can put the code on the chip, and it functions far faster than if you're just feeding it to the chip. So the crossbreeding of these things is happening. We've got 3D crosspoint from Intel and PCM from IBM, which are new types of memory that are slower than RAM, less expensive than RAM, but non-volatile. And these are creating a little bit of excitement amongst a number of software vendors that I've talked to. We've got SSDs, but now they're getting very, very large, and they're providing parallel access. With parallel access to a very large SSD, you can approach read speeds similar to RAM read speeds. So we've got this possibility of three types of storage: RAM, the 3D crosspoint stuff, and SSDs, all of which will be going extremely fast. And since speed is the essence of database, all the database technology is going to try and leverage these as fast as possible. And that's going to involve, and has been involved for a long time, parallel hardware architecture, but scale-out parallel hardware architecture. So the hardware level performance is accelerating all the time, has done for many years, continues to do so, and the general costs are falling. Trail of Tears. This is just different attempts at databases. The first databases before relational were generally referred to as network databases. Then came relational databases. Then came object databases. It didn't get a great deal of traction. Then came the column store databases, which were relational databases done very differently. And then we had the document databases and those SQL databases, which were object databases done differently, or if you like, the second coming of object database. And they caught on. And recently we've had graph databases gaining traction and RDF databases. And what you're looking at there is at least three different sets of data structures that are being accommodated. You know, the relational database does tables and rows very well. The document database and object databases, they do awkward data structures, particularly hierarchical data structures, very well. And graph databases and RDF databases do network data structures very well. And these different, I think of them as three lines, but these lines are going to continue indefinitely. It's not going to stop because the engines that do these things well don't work on the other data structures particularly well. And then we've got the spoiling factor of Hadoop. Hadoop's not a database, but there are databases that use HDFS4 for their storage structure. And a lot of the things that Hadoop does are the kind of management things that need to be done for a database. Also worth mentioning that Spark isn't a database either, but it does have, and it's immature, but it does have a SQL optimizer. and therefore it's like the kernel of a database without necessarily knowing where you're going to store the data. But if you stick it on HDFS, a lot of the database requirement is actually met simply by the capabilities of the underlying file system. Spark in particular has become part of the database ecosystem. And it's often federated with more powerful databases, and the reason for that really is analytics. Analytics, Spark goes very, very fast at analytics. Analytics is the prime application that most people are investing in right now, so the two walk hand in hand. Data federation rather than data concentration rules, it kind of should be obvious from the fact that you've got at least 3 differently structured kinds of databases out there, and therefore data federation, if you want to share the data between them, is often necessary. But you've also got databases that scale out and databases that don't. Really powerful engines like Teradata or Vertica that have a very particular place, but lesser engines that can do an awful lot of the work. So federation is likely to be there for a long, long time, even between relational databases. The final thing to say, the IoT, it ain't over until the fat lady starts disgorging data. The IoT may well create, in one way or another, different dynamics in the database world, and that will complicate things even more. Hopefully there'll be, in one way or another, there'll be some kind of convergence that goes on, but I don't see it all coming together like it did with relational databases. Not anytime soon, anyway. And I think that's all I've got to say, so I'll hand it over to Australia.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. Thanks for having me here this morning, or this afternoon, your time. So, yeah, this is a really hot topic because we have experienced quite an explosion in the last decade and a bit in the amount of data information that we're having to deal with, and invariably that data sits within some form of system that, for most cases, is a database of some form. So I thought I'd quickly take us through a very high-level sort of walkthrough of how we got here and the problem that's being created and the types of things we need to address now, and then we're going to talk about the types of solution that can be applied to that. So let me just grab hold of my first slide here. So I'm of the view that we're at the point now where DBAdmin 2.0 or Database Admin 2.0 is kind of where we're at now, where once upon a time, a database administrator was a fairly straightforward role and challenge, and you could train somebody to do it pretty quickly. In today's world, in my view, that is no longer the case, and I'm going to show you why I believe that is so. So once upon a time, a database administrator would be able to connect to the DB backend and do a quick show databases, and there'd be a list of databases in the system that they had to be aware of, and they could very quickly get across those databases and select them and have a bit of a poke and a probe around and use commands like describe table and find out what's in a table and each of the columns and rows. And it's a relatively straightforward challenge, and if you read the average 200 or 300-page book on database administration for each platform, you were able to almost teach yourself without having to do a rocket science degree. But that's no longer the case, and the reason for that, in my mind, is that there's just far too many options in the database world for any one person to be an expert or a specialist at, and to be able to manually manage and administer. And the reason for that is over the last 4 to 5 decades, when it comes to the world of servers and database systems, or database servers and application suites, we've come a very, very long way. Once upon a time, we had big iron having to deal with what was effectively small data, and laughingly small when we look back now. I saw a really neat photo on Twitter the other day of this amazing lady who was the lead programmer and developer for NASA at the time when we were putting men on the moon, and her code was printed out in 132-column line printers and fan-folded, and it stood actually taller than she was. That's the amount of code she wrote. But when I thought about that, I was thinking, well, it's probably about 200 or 300 megs worth of data if we actually type it all in at the most, if not less. And so the total amount of data to hold her code, even though it physically stood taller than her when it was printed out on paper, was actually a very, very small amount. even these massive room-sized computers, and this is an IBM System 360 in this particular slide, the amount of data it could actually hold was tiny compared to today's world. In fact, our smartphones hold 60 and 128 and 256 gig, and we'll soon have terabytes in our phones before long when the price of flash comes down. And so, at that time, in that era, database administration was quite straightforward. Here's a snapshot of a 3270 terminal session. And for a DBA, being able to log in and have a look at the number of files that were related to the database and the indexes that were there and the rows and columns was straightforward. And you can see here in this screenshot, the context of this is like one table and a number of table spaces. And that would have been the entire mainframe managing one database table. Whereas today, we hold billions of rows and records in database systems. And that change came about through a shift in technology that allowed us to build database platforms and data management systems. If we think about the sort of the original mainframe and mini computers running databases and then eventually relational databases some 50 plus years ago, in that big iron sort of world and the small data sets we had, by the time we got to about the 80s, we were sort of at the, we went through the mainframe to mini to then micro, and we had PCs running things like DBase 2 and DBase 3 and on DOS and CPM. We had a very early, relational database style technologies available, and they scaled quite well compared to what we were used to in the mainframe. By the time we got to the 90s, we had the likes of Infinix and Oracle and DB2, and in the late 90s we had people like Sequent computers that could glue and network multiple very, very big machines, cabinet-sized machines together and take the likes of Infinix and build these clusters of computers. But even then it was still small compared to what we're seeing today. But in the slide that I've got up here, this is a Hadoop cluster, and this effectively operates like one machine. So as far as it's concerned, it's just a really, really big computer, and it can host, the types of web scale data we're used to now. And so the challenge of database administration, database management on those types of platforms has indeed actually become, in my mind, rocket science. You've got to be extremely clever character to be able to understand the technology it runs on, the platforms it runs on, the data that's in there, the types of uses of those data. And we sort of saw this explosion from the early 2000s where we had Microsoft SQL become a thing. Lotus Notes was quite well established and out there, and the number of Lotus Notes databases that crept around the place were quite frightening. And we had the usual incumbents of sort of Oracle and DB2 and really starting to take a hold. Some of the brands like Infinix are starting to fade out. But we were still really just doing traditional database administration right up to that point, around about the sort of the 2006 era, where if I go back that image of that cluster, we had what we called Beowulf clusters become a thing where we could take off-the-shelf PCs and glue them together and make miniature supercomputers. But from about that point onwards, we crossed a tipping point where human beings were able to do old-school database administration. As I said, in my view, the scale became very, very big, very, very quickly. It's almost like we had this big bang event in technology that drove the adoption of data technology or data management technologies, and particularly the databases around them. And because we were, in effect, building high-performance compute-style clusters to host data in different forms. And to punctuate that point, here's a snapshot of the landscape as of 2016 of database technologies that are available to us, ranging from the bottom right-hand corner in open source all the way to the top left-hand corner in infrastructure, and then the top right-hand corner application platform solutions that are available to us, excuse me, and the bottom left-hand corner, a mixture of infrastructure and performance engines that do analytics and so forth. And in the middle, there's devices like our smartphones, which of course do actually run very small versions of databases to do things like manage our contacts and so forth, or our call logs and other things that we've had. And so in my mind, there was this explosion, kind of like a Cambrian explosion, if you're into that sort of thing, where the amount of technology development that took place in that very short period of time from about 2006 to 2016 now, which is effectively a decade, as it were, We've now seen graph databases become a big thing, in-memory databases become a big thing, NoSQL databases coming along. The move to different computing models, Hadoop came about. We had the MapReduce model. Now we've got Spark and streaming analytics and streaming compute, resilient distributed data frameworks that people have to develop for to get to the scales that we need. And when we think about that journey, we've sort of go through the sort of, what was relational database management systems with the usual suspects, Oracle, Postgres, Sybase, IBM DB2, MySQL, and the Microsoft SQL database server platform. We've seen some new kids come on block now, Clustrix, Xeround, NeoDB, MemSQL, and there's dozens and dozens more as you saw on that slide before. So if you can imagine the challenge of having to know these platforms and know how to run them and get the single pane of glass view that you require to be a DBA into these things, the challenge is far from trivial now. And then all of a sudden, along came the NoSQL engines, which are a whole new breed of fun challenge. And so the final slide over here is sort of the ultimate 1, 2, 3 knockout punch, and that is that we've taken some of these technologies now and we've created them a service capability for them. We've put them into cloud models, and they are now available as a utility, as a service. You can basically get database as a service, and the usual brands that we see there of Amazon's web services and Google's cloud compute platform and Microsoft Azure are the ones that come to mind for most people, but there's actually dozens and dozens of cloud platforms now. And in Australia, for example, there's something like 112 companies that are bona fide large-scale public clouds that offer database as service in various forms. So to think about the challenge that the average DBA has to get out of bed and go to work and cope with now, it's quite a mind-boggling challenge. And so I'm very much of this view now that, like many things in life, we've scaled up both horizontally and vertically. That is that the infrastructure is scaled in a very horizontal and near linear growth model. And the complexity of the stack in a vertical sense, the number of database platforms, the number of application frameworks and models we have to deal with, have gotten well beyond what humans should be able to cope with in single pane of glass view. And we're at the point now where database administrators need a whole set of new tools to be able to talk to all of these platforms, monitor them, manage them, administer them, and support them. And I believe that's the entire topic of our conversation this morning, or this afternoon, your time. And with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to our guests who will tell us a lot about their product and how it's going to address this challenge.
All right, Scott.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Des. Thanks, Robin, and thanks all for joining and having me on the call today. I want to thank Robin and Des for taking me a walk down memory lane. Having been in the space since the early 90s, you brought back a lot of good memories. The memory that I didn't see on any of those slides and the pictures were the punch cards, and that was the very first thing that was introduced to me when I first started at my first job out of university. My coworker in the cube next to me told me not to touch his punch cards. So, yeah, absolutely, and it has been indeed a challenge, and a challenge that we have been working on helping our customers address since the mid-90s, and this is a product that I wanted to talk about today. So let's take a look at the multi-platform management, and this is only a subset. I chose a graph, but as Des put up there, that
you got to share your screen.
Oh, I sure do. Thank you.
No worries. And folks, don't be shy. Ask questions. We got 3 smarty pants on the call today, so send in the hard questions. You can use the Q&A component of your webcast console, or you can tweet with the hashtag of briefr. Okay, Scott, take it away.
There we go. Thank you. So I grabbed this slide and this little image, but the image from Des really blew me away, because that's really the world we're living in today, and the world that the DBAs are performing in. And as I mentioned, it is no longer, you really struggle to be able to do this with just brute force. You really need the tools, and that's where we're coming into play, and we're seeing that whole switch, the momentum change, where it was early on. And we were very siloed, as I mentioned, and then we went to working with multiple database platforms. So that was our first foray into the tools. And then it was back out to where organizations, after, year 2000, and when it sort of constricted a little bit, right, in the organizations where they wanted to go solid, but then it came back and it just really blew up when you introduced all those new platforms. And now, instead of being pigeonholed into a specific platform or specific technology, now the organizations are finding out what's best, right? What is the best application database, what best platform to use? And with that said, I want to walk you through a little bit about what we do with DBArtisan. And DBArtisan has been our flagship product, managing, as it says, across platform environments for over 20 years. And this is where we live, and this is where we like to emphasize and work with our customers and give them the tools to make them productive and performant. And so let's go ahead, and I'm going to hop right in. I'm showing the product more than I do going through slides, and I think you probably do too. So for those of you who have not seen DBArtisan before, we're looking at the concept, and I think Dez used the term single pane of glass. That is something that we pride ourselves on, to giving the DBA the single look into all of their platforms, right? No need to open up any other application. We're going to be able to connect and get you in there and start working with the platform. Now, looking at the Database Explorer to the left, we can create this as we see fit. We can organize it however we'd like. You'll see I have a mix. I have some of my Oracle servers. I have MySQL. I have Postgres in here. I also have one that's labeled production servers that some include some of my SQL Server environments. So again, you can see right there that we've got a good fit. If I look at registering a new database, you'll see what are the platforms we support, and there's a couple that I want to bring up. You'll notice Windows Azure SQL, support for that, Teradata, Apache, Postgres, you see, but here are the generics that we support. So if we have a JDBC driver or an ODBC driver to any of the platforms, we're able to connect, give you a connection, and allow you to work with the platform right from within DBArtisan. So again, letting you focus on the job at hand and not how you're going to get it done, right? So walk through all that, but I want to show a few things about the product. So in this case, let's open up and we'll deal with Oracle, for example. So this is just my little landing page here, but I want to go and take a look at some of my schemas that I work with. So we're going to pull in one of the larger schemas. So again, we'll bring back the list of tables. Right, in this case, I'm going to open up a table. So we're going to just select open, and it's going to bring it up into our object editor. Now, if Oracle has been something that I've worked with for years, right, what I'm going to show you is probably an easy statement for you. But if Oracle is a platform, or if Postgres is a platform, or Teradata is a platform that you've just been given and you need to come up to speed, the task at hand is to add a column, right? Or maybe the task at hand is to delete a column. But you don't want to have to worry about the syntax, right? We want to go just type what we need, set it up, and let DBArtisan generate, right? So here we're going to press Alter. It's going to generate the script for us. Again, a very simple example, but the point is that it's going to do the work for us in order to generate and place this column into the table. What we can also do, though, is move columns around in the table. If you've ever tried to do that with traditional, right, it's a little bit more complicated than just a single line of code like this is, right? But again, DBArtisan is going to work behind the scenes, generate the code for you, and again, produce the SQL. We'll close out of here, right? And before I do, notice all the tabs across the top. Again, the user interface is very intuitive. If I come into the Explorer, if I hop down to Postgres, right, if I go into my schema node there, look at the tables, very similar look and feel, right? We'll open this up. Again, we'll see the information here, the properties, the ancestors, the columns. Again, we're specific to the platform. We're going to give you this, the user interface to be able to display this and to work with the objects, right? So you're going to know what you need to do. We're going to enable you to do it in an efficient, timely manner, and so you don't have to worry about exactly what is the clause that needs to go there in order to provide that option. We'll take care of that for you. Also, when we look, I'm going to hop over to SQL Server now and talk a little bit about some of the other features. So we all need to monitor the database, right? So again, start it up. Let's see all the sessions that are occurring, sessions that are running, right? How are we going to, what statements are being executed, and being able to have control over that. Do we need to stop a session? Do we need to see any locks that could be on the database, any blocking locks? Again, we have all that information right here at our fingertips in order for us to quickly react, take corrective actions if needed, and turn it around. We'll come back over to our Explorer. This is where this is the driving point. This is where I always come back to. This is where I personally like to get things started and work from here. As I'm connected to a SQL Server database, look at the utilities, right? Because we're cross-platform, right, we can start looking at extractions, migrations. So we can move across platforms if we need to migrate objects from one platform to another. We can do that, provided those objects exist on the different platforms. Extract the schemas, publish to reports, load and unload data, and backup databases. Again, all that from within the UI. And coming over here to the tools, you can see a complete set of tools that we can operate from, right? From between the find-in files, we can do a complete database search where we're looking inside of the system tables to find that string that you're searching for. Script and file execution. If you have a standard statement that can be executed against multiple platforms, multiple data sources, we can set that up right from within a DBArtisan, point it to the targets that we wanted to execute against, press go, and it will run and bring us back the results against all of those target data sources. So again, letting you work from that single pane of glass. The analyst series, again, those are more in-depth. Those are geared towards the relational databases. As we start getting into more of the newer platforms, you'll start seeing us expand this functionality into those arenas as well. And in general, just a lot of user interface enhancements, features geared specifically for the DBA. Items such as we have the ability to do a script library. Those SQL scripts that you execute often against multiple platforms, save it here, drag it. As soon as we get a new iSQL window set up, we can just drag the script in, and we've got the script now ready to go. So again, having that at your fingertips to be able to do and manage. You'll notice that we deliver with scripts already defined for some of the platforms, and we can go ahead and create as many as we need to at any time. Nice thing that I like, and a lot of our customers do, if you're ever interested, and I get this question a lot in regards to how do I do that? That's pretty cool. How does DBArtisan do that? There's a little feature right here, log file. You can log all the SQL statements that we execute. So if you want to know how we populate that Explorer tree, or how we populate the editor for a Postgres table or a Teradata table, log the SQL. And we will record everything that DBArtisan is executing against the database, and you can come back and look at that SQL and have everything that we need. So maybe you want to incorporate that as part of one of your scripts. Absolutely. Totally fine. We like to be very transparent with what we're doing and what we're executing against the database. Hence, we're going to allow you to save and record anything that we apply to the database. We have configuration options as well. You'll notice I have it set up as organizing by object owner. I can also organize it by object type. So in that case, if I came into my Postgres environment again, I went to the schemas. If I looked at the tables, instead of just my GIM tables belonging in that schema, I'm going to see all of my tables regardless of the schema name. So again, different ways to organize things, really customize it for your own workflow and how you'd like to see it. And last thing I want to talk about is the ability to set bookmarks. So if I drill in, if I'm working in one of my platforms and I want to focus on just my tables node, I can add a bookmark. And though it's a very simple feature, but it's so nice to have, especially when you're working with as many data sources and as many platforms as today's DBA is, to be able to come into the system, start up DBArtisan, and let the bookmark manager take you right to the spot in the tree where you need to be and be able to work. And then from here, right, I could create a new table, and again, on the platforms that we support that you saw earlier, and we're going to walk you through a wizard to let you drive and develop and create the table. Right, and we're going to generate all the syntax needed to do that behind the scenes for you and then present that to you at the end in a preview pane. You get to validate, see exactly what we're going to generate. You can hit the execute button then, or the finish button, let it execute, or you can save it or push it off to another iSQL window. So make it, again, maybe it needs to be part of a larger script that you want to save and deploy during your batch window hours. So that is an overview of DBArtisan. When we talk about that, again, it is our product that's seen a lot of platforms, support for those platforms, and great experience, user experience, so great feedback from our customers as well. And if you're interested, as one of the panelists, but if you need to find anything IDERA related or anything DBArtisan related, feel free to reach out, and you can certainly find me at my email address.
All right, I guess I'll throw it over to Robin for questions, and then Dez, and then I'll be monitoring the Q&A from the attendees. Robin, take it away.
Okay, well, I mean, the first question, I've actually been familiar with DBArtisan for quite a while, so I'm kind of aware of its capabilities. So what I'd be interested in you addressing is it's kind of future path from here. I mean, I see, you know, the last time I looked at it, must have been a long time ago, I see that you're supporting at least 3 databases that I didn't realize that you supported before. What is the forward path for DBArtisan? Is it likely that you're just going to add more and more databases, or is it a feature extension thing? Where are you intending to go with it?
That's a great question, and I'd like all of the above. We certainly are going to continue to build out because the traditional RDBMS platforms aren't sitting still, right? They're continuing to build out. So we will continue to follow that path, and then you'll see us start looking and going in that direction of supporting net new platforms because we recognize that even though some of those platforms are continuing to grow, the traditional RDBMS, there are certain situations that the new platforms are the right platforms for customers to go with. So we really are, you know, keeping a close eye on that market, on that segment, and trying to make the right decisions on which platforms to go with. They seem to be changing every day, though, practically.
Well, as both I and Dez were saying, it's a very lively market is possibly one way of looking at it. Another thing I'd be interested in, and obviously you're not going to be able to answer this question in precise detail, but I've come across sites in my time where there were 1,000 instances of Oracle. And Oracle wasn't the only database being in use that was being deployed, you know. And when I actually talked to them about how on earth do you manage that many instances, they said, well, you know, there's only about 5 or 6 big instances, and we've got about 3 DBAs we spread across that. So I'm kind of interested in terms of using DBArtisan because you can do an awful lot with it. How many databases does it sit over, let's say typically, or even what are the largest examples of how many it's trying to manage at once?
Well, I've seen situations, and again, it's a little bit complicated. That question is because DBArtisan allows me to have multiple connections or multiple data sources defined to a single instance. Maybe I want to do a sys login and then a lower permissions login. But I've dealt with customers that with everything collapsed, it's going multiple screens. Now, when I ask them that, the question that you've asked me is, how do you manage that many? And he says, I don't, right? I manage what I can, but I need access to everything. And so I'm yet to see anything that stops. You know, the upper limits of what people can manage is really the upper limit of what that person, the individual, can handle. But, you know, those, as I mentioned, those people that I challenge with, they openly admit that they have all those connections, but there's no way that they can, you know, manage. They rely on their team. And
yeah,
I'm sure your experience, yeah.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, I've actually been a DBA myself, although I didn't do that for very long. And the one thing that I remember above and beyond anything else in relational databases is that you can do a massive amount of things with SQL, often more than you think you could, which in one way or another explains some of the functionality that DBArtisan's got, because it just translates directly into SQL. But you do. I'm sure you do other things. So is it all SQL scripting, or is there other special routines that have been written for esoteric situations?
Yeah, a lot of it, the bulk of it is SQL. That's just the nature of that. But we do write routines that can be run from a command line using the vendor's tools or the vendor's front ends. We'll put front ends onto, throw an example for the data load utilities and the platforms, right? Those aren't SQL scripts, right? Those are command line jobs, and we'll generate those and be able to give those to the DBA that they can then execute. So yeah, we'll do a little bit of both, but majority of it are SQL scripts.
Yeah, I figured. And in looking at, because obviously you must in one way or another take a look at the developments that are going on that I regard as fairly new. I mean, one of the things that I find interesting that's happening is that Spark obviously is taking off like a rocket, but Spark SQL it's gone from being horribly immature to starting to look a bit more mature with a bit more SQL capabilities. Do you look at things like that and wonder whether you're going to start managing those with DBArtisan?
Certainly, and I do. That's always there. I know our product management team is always looking at where to go, and absolutely, there's really everything's on the table for us when it regards to what we're looking at in the future.
Okay, Dez, do you want to pile in?
Yeah, actually, there's a bunch of great things you opened the door for me there, Robin. Thank you very much. I'm keen to just kind of explore some of the things that jump out at me when I look at products like this, and I get very excited because when I double check my homework, because like Dr. Robin Bloor mentioned before, as have I, have been tracking this for some time, and I remember looking at your spec requirements the other day and thinking, actually, this thing runs on very lean for what it actually does. And I think from memory, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was like, as little as like a laptop performance would comfortably run DBArtisan, and yet it was capable of running some pretty significant database backends. And I was quite interested to see that you had Firebird as well now and Greenplum. So I was quite impressed with the requirement or the specification of the hardware, and it could quite literally run in like a gig of RAM on a 1 gigahertz CPU or something. So that was pretty impressive. But in the use cases is something that I want to delve into just a little bit. Are you seeing the uptake of the product being a case of a need because of existing environments that have just gotten out of control? Or are you seeing people now being a little bit more proactive and saying, we're building something very, very big. It is complex. And I'm thinking about mergers and acquisitions, for example, here, where an organization might buy a bunch of firms, small, medium, large, whatever, and end up inheriting all these environments and having to build a new DB capability. What are the typical use cases for this as far as the type of organization and the type of application to it? Is it predominantly people who've got existing environments and have to just clean them up and get control of them, or are people being a bit more proactive and thinking about the complexity that they're about to build and get you on board early?
We're seeing more of getting on early for the very reason you mentioned, the consolidation. With the breadth of platform support that we have, it's not total future-proofing, right? But it's putting you and your DBAs in a really good situation that when they do look at a potential acquisition target, right, they're a little bit less, the thought of what platforms could we be inheriting, right? It's sort of, though it's important, right, but it's sort of, the concern there is a little bit less than what it's going to mean to our DBAs, right? The DBAs have a product now that they know they can connect, and if they're familiar with using the product, they're going to be familiar with connecting to that platform that they've just acquired. So that's certainly an area that we're seeing. Again, long time, the customers with that mashup of all those platforms, right? How am I going to get my hands around this, right? And they've tried it because the thought process is each of these platforms have a tool, right? We can use their own tool, right? But it eventually comes back that, you know what, yes, you can, but I'm learning, not only am I have to learn each of the platforms, now I'm learning each one of the tools that go with each one of the platforms, and so you've just compounded the job of the DBA. So we're also seeing that situation where they're coming back to us and saying, you know, well, we need to get our hands around this. Let's get one tool for the DBA, because I've got more important things for the DBA to do than to learn the UI of a new tool or different tools.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you know, when you see, I think from memory when I looked yesterday, just to double check I wasn't wrong, I remember you'd supported Sybase, for example. So this thing's been around for a little while. There's another question I had for you, actually. Just yeah. It's great to have Greenplum and Firebird on your list, but your Sybase, that kind of adds something quickly that shows it's been around for a while and done a good job. Clusters. So one of the biggest headaches for a DBA is they will point at essentially what looks like an IP address and a bunch of APIs, or whether it's JDBC or ODBC or whatever we might be talking to. But behind that, there's a cluster. What can or does DBArtisan know about what's behind door number one, as it were? As in, when I plug into the database back end, do I get to see all the environments behind there? And in particular, so there's two parts to the question maybe. The cluster, for example, if you think about, you know, you support like IBM DB2 and Microsoft SQL Database Server and MySQL and Postgres and Oracle and some of those traditional RDBMSs. And, you know, invariably we run a master-slave or master-master environment for redundancy and high availability and also performance. Does DBArtisan know that there's something behind door number one that's not just one database per se, but a cluster? And if so, what does it know about that? And
yeah.
Just and to flow into that quickly, so you can answer the same question. Sorry. So behind the clusters, in some of the scenarios you've got, how are people coping with the mix between production environments and disaster recovery environments as far as DBArtisan's use goes?
Great questions. I'll give you, that's going to be contingent on the specific platforms, because as much as we try, we're going to have different levels of support for some of those in-depth, the deeper down features. For Oracle, for example, in their RAC environment, Real Application Cluster, you can connect to the primary node of that cluster, but yet going through the database monitor that I showed, we're going to let you see the SQL running, and we're actually going to tell you what node of the cluster it's running on. Right, to let you see exactly, well, you know, slow running query, let's keep an eye on that. What node is it running on? And because inevitably the whole reason for the cluster, right, is for the end user. He doesn't care where it's being executed, but for the DBA, we need to keep track of that type of information. So we're able to go down to that level of detail in Oracle, for example. The other platforms, though we do have connectivity, probably not as much detail than we do for Oracle. With regards to the production and the development environment, that's a good question. We're given the same level of support. The real primary way that we're going to assist, the connectivity layer is going to be there, right? We're going to be able to connect and do all the features. I have customers that are utilizing some of the features in DBArtisan to categorize their data sources, right? So they're going to, and again, this might be a little bit off of the exact question you're asking, but we're going to enable them to graphically denote as they're working, because that's one of the things about DBArtisan is I can quickly change between data sources. And the next thing you know, I'm getting ready to run a truncate statement, and I'm looking to say, am I connected? Did I just run this against production or development? And so we provide some features within DBArtisan to help the DBAs out there as well to manage that and keep them out of trouble, if you will, with some of the DBA activities.
With that in mind, you know, on the long list of platforms you do currently support, and I'm sure that will explode very soon, for obvious reasons. I mean, you support the likes of, say, DB2 on ZOS, for example, on mainframe, and then obviously you support on the likes of, you know, sort of what we used to call mid-range, but now just Unix systems. And then sort of more modern platforms, sort of, you know, Linux, and then you know, eventually it'll get ported to the likes of Bluemix and on Cloud Foundry. So sort of you'll end up with DB2 running on the Cloud Foundry on Bluemix with IBM in the cloud on software and so forth. Are people currently running not just the management and monitoring, but also, you mentioned before, the ability to migrate and move data around? Are you seeing people jump in bed with DBArtisan and say, you know, we've got a bunch of stuff on the old mainframes that we just need to get off, and it was a real hassle to do that. If I can point and click and drag from here to there, I can actually move and migrate my data and my schemas and so forth. Is that a thing that people are doing?
They're looking. They're starting. They are indeed moving, right? They're moving the data off, right? Now, they're using Artisan, DBArtisan as a tool for that. Is it doing everything for them? No. We're starting, you know, the drag and drop, not exactly there, but we're enabling them to generate some scripts, because ideally you're going to want to use, you don't want this job to be running on your client, on your laptop, for the very reason that you mentioned. You know, we can run on a very, very low footprint. Right, so we're helping them generate scripts and then turning it around and building it, and then they can deliver that script over and have it run on the server, right, and get the power, the horsepower behind the server to do that. So we're helping them generate some of their jobs to do some of that work.
Right. So a couple of last ones for you, and then we might circle back. The thing that's really struck me just going through your demo, which is fantastic, and in fact, I wish we had another hour to go into more detail. A really big challenge for DBAs, right, is basic compliance, overall governance of the infrastructure, the audits, reporting on current state, looking at future-proofing for things like, you know, just general growth of the environment. It strikes me that even though at the core of what your product seems to do, which is just make life easy with single pane of glass, single view of the world, and I can essentially click and point and drag, and I love the fact that I can train somebody to do this very quickly now. They don't have to be able to read the manual, as it were. It strikes me that the tool also gives me the ability to do a whole bunch of things around governance and compliance and audits that I'm wondering whether people have actually kind of woken up to. I'm sure they have. But are you seeing folk now look at this and go, and it's like this eureka aha moment going, hey, you know what, this makes the DBA's life really easy or easier from an operational point of view or a development point of view. But gosh, we could actually just report on all of our databases now and all the data sets and all the content of this data and all of the metadata around it, like who's got access, when they've got access, why they've got access, and what type of access they've got, and then all of a sudden address some of the challenges around compliance, particularly when we've got some really big things happening around data breaches. We've got some amazing things like the global financial crises, all these challenges that companies have sat back and said, how on earth are we going to measure and monitor and address compliance? Has that become a big thing for people yet, or is that still sort of early days as far as the applying DBArtisan to it?
I have customers that can't say enough about DBArtisan, and those are the ones that have realized that. The light bulb's gone on. So wait a minute. I can reply and respond and generate some of the very reports you mentioned, right, all from within one tool. I've got it. Now, there's others that are still yet to catch on to that, and that could be for various reasons, right? They may not be tasked with yet, or maybe, you know, it's being handled by somebody else. But our customers that we found that are using it, that's that aha moment, right? That not only am I able to create a table, but I know all this stuff. And absolutely, for, you know, with all the compliance requirements, it's huge. That's a job in and of itself.
Well, indeed, and you know, I mean, off the top of my head, I'm immediately thinking, you know, if someone comes along and says they wanted to create a configuration management database, a CDMB, if they're having to meet, you know, everything from Sarbanes-Oxley to COBIT to ITIL, you know, SWIFT compliance and banking, so forth. I mean, even going down to the likes of the International Standards Organization, ISOs, 27001, 27002, and some of these really big frameworks. One of the challenges is just finding where the data is, who's managing it, what format it's in, and I'm thinking, you know, this it has for me, like for me, just sort of watching that eureka moment just went up and was like, hang on a second, I could throw this thing at even somebody who isn't necessarily a DBA, but I could train them quickly and say, it's a compliance tool. So I think it's great that it does its job in a database administration, database management world. But I'm sitting there thinking, God, just the fact that you can manage multiple platforms with one interface, and you can dive right down into, as you said, logging the transactions that you do. Imagine taking this tool into a data breach incident, and you've got your security team running around trying to find what's where and why and who's seen what. And as they're moving around, they have to log and track every action they do because they may become part of the problem if they can't otherwise. I think there's an incredible capability here that you could immediately start to do. Particularly when we look at the challenge of data audits. We have this massive feature creep, as it were, with data sets and data. And one of the things we talked about in another couple of shows we've done is, how do you go and find your data? And often we talk about the fact that when you start in a new organization, you tend to stand up in your cubicle and put your hand in the air and wave and go, hey, does anyone know where this database is? How do I get to this data source? Where's this file? Go and ask reception, right? It strikes me that your tool can immediately provide that capability of finding things and discovering them and even reporting on them. It'd be interesting. So back to one of the questions just briefly, and then I'll wrap up and hand back to Eric. It strikes me that scale is going to become a challenge in the early, in the next sort of 12 months for you. Can you give us some insight, just very at a 30,000-foot point of view, I guess, in the scale or the range of scale that DBArtisan is comfortable with? So, I can imagine when I put this on my laptop and I rock up and I point it at an environment, I can discover it and I can start doing things on it. So I imagine it goes from a single little, open source MySQL database engine with a few rows and tables. What scale do we go up to? I mean, you're talking about DB2 on mainframes, that's big, and clusters. What's the range of scale that we can sort of cope with here? And Robin sort of touched on that earlier, but I was just keen to get into that in a little more detail of sort of how big we can get with DBArtisan.
Sure. There certainly are going to be your challenges because it is a client piece of software, and so again, if I'm working on a mainframe and when I'm working against our test system on the mainframe that we have, I can point it against millions of rows and do a cross join against millions of rows, right? A lot of that, all the work is going to be done on a server, right? Because we're passing that command, and that's just a matter of DBArtisan handling the result sets. Right, and so that's the challenge, right, is that and that's the beauty, right, of what we're doing is most of the heavy lifting is being done on the server. We're just handling all the results. And so, again, you get into situations, of course, when you want to run 10 queries simultaneously that are all returning millions of rows. Yeah, absolutely, you might find yourself in some performance there, right? But at no time do I have customers shy away from running big queries against DBArtisan, against their database. So again, like I said, mileage varies depending on a lot of factors, right? But again, like I said, I'm dealing with millions of rows coming back, and as long as it fills up the grid, I'm ready to go. But sometimes, obviously, I have to wait for those results to come back.
Final question for you before I wrap up, because I've taken too much of your time now, and thank you for that. Just tell us a bit more around, reading the latest specs yesterday, just to make sure that I was across as well as I thought I was. Process monitoring and sort of alerting and notifications. Capacity planning, for example, is a massive issue for DBAs all day, every day. Is someone going to fill up this table? Is they going to fill up the database? Are they going to fill up the disk space I've got? How do I manage this? Give us a quick rundown on sort of the process monitoring and particularly monitoring alerts, and then ideally around capacity planning. That I think that's an area that we sort of could be a lot of interest in.
Yep. Process monitoring, I showed probably the feature that majority of our customer base uses, and that's the database monitor to be able to show and view that. And we do have some in the analyst pack. Performance Analyst does have some alerts you can set up when certain thresholds are met, and it can alert you. Maybe X number of logs, errors in the log file. It'll get out an alert for you. Table space hitting a certain percentage full, you can get another alert. And the beauty of it is you're in the same tool, right? It's a part of DBArtisan, so you just right-click on the alert, and you manage with DBArtisan, and it takes you right to the table space editor, and you can address the problem right there. With regards to capacity, absolutely that is a hot button, and capacity analysts that we have currently is ported to SQL Server, Oracle, DB2, LUW, and Sybase ASE, and that does exactly what you described. You can start, once we get some collections, right, and once we get a sample size, maybe it's row size, maybe it's object count, lots of options within the tool, and then you can start trending, right? And what is it going to look like in 6 months? What's it going to look like in 12 months? I can just trend to a date, or I can trend to a value, right? In an example you had, I have X amount of disk space. Based on that, when am I going to hit that limit? Based on the growth that I have in these collections that I've done, when am I going to hit that limit? So at least I know I can start planning for that. Is it going to be 6 months? Is it going to be 2 years? But again, we can use the capacity analyst to trend towards that.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Look, fantastic demo. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to pass back to Eric because I know there are a couple of questions that have popped up from our amazing audience today. Thank you so much. It's been really great to get to know the product well, and I look forward to keeping a very close eye on it.
Okay, good. We do have a couple good questions, and we're going a little bit over time, so we'll try to wrap up quickly because I know, Scott, you've got close to hard stop. Here's a big question. Well, how about working on old data stores like vSAN and Model 205 and IMS and IDMS and those kinds of things? Do you see that very often these days, and how well does it work?
I don't want to tell you that you're stuck, right? Some of those environments, if they have ODBC or JDBC, and I know some of them are out there, and we can connect to it, right? And you can work with it via that way. But for the most part, the green screen is the way to go still.
That's good.
I love the green screen.
Well, you know, as Dez pointed out with that one slide where he had all those different applications and tools that are available today, that is a very daunting reality for anyone who wants to responsibly perform the function of a database administrator. And I'm guessing that over time you guys can build connectors to any one of these tools as and when customers demand it and so forth, right, such that you enable that single pane of glass.
And that was the big key behind making DBArtisan equipped to be able to handle those JDBC and ODBC connections. We really extended it out now. So, you know, now as long as we have that connection, right, as long as we have that driver, we can connect and work against it.
That's good stuff. Well, folks, we archive all these for later viewing. I posted a link to the slides. Hopefully you can see that via slide share. Thanks so much for all of your efforts, gentlemen. Wonderful webcast today again. A lot of good slides, a lot of good content. I love that demo. It really is kind of interesting. I think that you guys have targeted a very sweet spot in the marketplace because there is such an explosion of database types these days, and we just need, as managers, some place to handle all that. So well done, guys. We'll catch up to you tomorrow for another hot technology. So hopefully you've carved out an hour tomorrow at the same time, same bat time, same bat station. We'll catch up to you next time, folks. Take care. Bye-bye.